talk about for us disease,
Disease.
what that really means.
Okay. Disease often, especially in holistic circles, it's more commonly, you'll hear naturopaths, chiropractors, and so on, they'll split the word in dis-ease. I think that's fair to do, and I think that's really the origin of the word. It's, sort of anything other than ease. Dis is dysfunctional, right? So, or aberrant or abnormal. So when you're not in a state of balance, biologically they call it homeostasis, which literally means the same place. Everything within our genetic code sort of leads us towards that. I mean, all the programming in our genome is meant to keep us in the same place. In other words, normal function and a high level of health and vibrancy. We don't have, something encoded normally in the genome that is coded for disease, sickness, illness. We all know that we can have genetic predispositions. Those are glitches in the genome, right? That could be accumulated from inputs from the environment, just, sort of a mismatch and a problem with recombination during development. But by and large, if we look at our normal state of homeostasis, all things in all biology sort of run together, where all roads lead to balance, equilibrium. That's homeostasis. So disease is really just any departure from that balance, that level of homeostasis. Anything that pushes you out of balance, you're technically in a state of disease. The last thing I'd say about that, though, to be clear, is that typically when we're talking about medicine and healthcare in general, very often we talk about disease, we're really talking about pathology, right? So most physicians, clinicians in general, if they're talking about a disease, they're talking about something you can see, or whether it's under a microscope or not, an infection or a certain metastatic disease or autoimmune disease. So something that you can measure and you can put a label on, that's really pathology. So I think it's worth sort of pointing that out, because in a discussion like this, when we're talking about sort of a holistic view, looking at the everything that you've covered and what we're going to cover in terms of body, mind, spirit, and looking at the whole milieu, the whole thing, how it works, we're typically talking about anything that just sort of knocks out of balance. That traditionally or contemporarily is referred to as functional medicine, or functional healthcare, where we're looking at the underlying function of dis-ease, right? So if a person has terrible, stomach pains, they've got, constipation, diarrhea, they've got, terrible cramps after, no matter what they eat, let's say, they go and get an endoscopy up, from up top, a colonoscopy from down below, they might get a upper GI, radiograph, CTs, etc. And everything's ruled out. That's typically meaning they're ruling out disease,
Right.
in kind of the more contemporary medical term. But that's when somebody like myself tends to step in. If they come to me first, I want them to go and rule all of that out. I don't deal with pathology like that, right? So I'm not like sort of, I'm not going to do surgery or anything of that nature. So, typically when I think of it in the way that we're talking about it, I think tonight, which is dis-ease, more not just pathology, but a literally lack of effortless ease, which is our normal natural state. So in a functional medicine paradigm, with that example, the hypothetical, which is super common, where people have been scoped and scanned and there's no pathology, very often, I would say in the vast majority of cases, the next step in our current standard of care is to just give them something to mitigate the symptoms, right? And I wouldn't say that there's anything wrong with that inherently, but I think that that's not a good final step. So in other words, take what you need to take to improve your quality of life in the short term, and let's go about the business of trying to find the underlying cause of the dysfunction. So I think, so when we talk about disease from sort of a natural or sort of a holistic standpoint, we can think of it as dysfunction, right? So it's not functioning properly, but there's no pathology there. That's a really important thing to think about for folks, because and I'm not critical or criticizing the standard of care. It is what it is, and I think that we need it. We also need this sort of cherry on top in that process, which is, for example, a really, really common example, for me anyways, in my patient base, is blood pressure. Right. So, I just did an hour ago, before getting here, this is a really common, almost a daily conversation, where somebody comes in, their blood pressure is super high. This particular fellow today has CT scans, ultrasounds of his carotid arteries. They checked his renal arteries. They've looked at every aspect of the blood work, and it just gets lumped into essential hypertension, which means that there's no known cause.
Right.
So now he's coming to see me to see if I can figure it out, and it doesn't. And it's sort of, it's because it falls outside even what you have time to do in most medical offices today in a 10 or 12-minute visit.
Right.
So, I'll set about the course of trying to rule out every possible underlying dysfunction that's leading to this before it leads to disease. Right. But it would, just like the gut example, just like the blood pressure. If it's, in other words, yes, take lisinopril, hydrochlorothiazide, whatever whatever your drug of choice is. And while that's controlling it, let's get about the business of finding the underlying cause. I don't claim to be able to find it 100% of the time. As the years have gone by, I find it the majority of the time. But I don't, the buck doesn't stop with me either. If I can't figure it out, I refer out to someone else to keep on looking, because there's always an underlying cause, right? And I think blood pressure is a classic example that'll come up probably tonight a few times, because, when we talk about toxicity and the lack of detoxification capacity, it's one of the first things to show up.
Yeah.
And so this fellow that I was talking to an hour ago, I won't be surprised at all if that's what shows up.
Yeah.
But if we didn't address it, he's already at that point. He's only talking to me because the pills aren't working anymore.
Gotcha.
Right? It was controlled, and now it's out of control. And so that's where you got to find the underlying mechanism. So that's kind of it for sort of how to think about disease. You want to have, treat it as a dysfunction before it develops into pathology, and then it's too late in many cases.
Right.
Right.
You mentioned the detoxification capacity.
Yes.
So, in keeping with the series that we're talking about, when I am not at ease, or I'm not functioning the way I'm supposed to, we've talked about this in the past couple weeks about things that go wrong in our mind, as far as our thoughts, as far as how that happens. So one of the things that I think is hugely interesting is this connection between our mind and our brain, and how thoughts affect the brain. And we talked a little bit about thoughts being physical things in your mind. Or in your brain, I'm sorry. Come from your mind, become, we describe them as little trees in your brain. And then those things being reinforced over time, they can become toxic. So can you talk a little bit about how our thoughts, what goes on in our mind, how that affects and can affect the body? But not only that, even talk a little bit about how, what are the built-in mechanisms that we have that, once we fix it, how do we, what can we look forward to in a sense of, does it get better, or are we just going to be damaged goods? Or talk about a little bit about, not just in the mind, but the body in general. Are we, can we be hopeful that that there's going to be not just a little bit of improvement or reprieve for the moment, but talk about the body's ability to detoxify itself, brain, body. I mean, brain is body, but it's so hard for us. For some reason, I think my brain's not part of my body, but
Right.
it is, and I know it has a big thing. So
yeah, and so first thing I would say about that is that that's an excellent way to delineate between the two things. The brain being still an organ, right? It's a structural organ. It's the most complicated one known to us. It's actually the most complicated thing known to man at this point. But the decade of the brain started in the 90s, and it's still going on. So we've had this massive continual upswing in neuroscientific research, and there's neuropsychiatric, neuropsychological research. So the mind, and I think that, to your point there, brain and body, we always tend to in conversation separate it out, but I think we're really talking about mind versus body.
Right.
And it wasn't that long ago that was still considered a totally metaphysical sort of fringe mystical thing, and it's nice to, I'm glad I've been around long enough, even professionally, to see that that's changed. Which always struck me as silly. I mean, who hasn't had that experience before? So the mind being this ethereal thing that is really difficult to measure and quantify. It's still at this point, with the great technology that we have, the brain, we can watch its function with functional imaging, like a functional MRI or a PET or a SPECT scan. So we can see how it's working in real time. But who hasn't had that experience of just a thought pops into their head about, say, an upcoming event like this, like let's say public speaking is the #1 fear, right?
Yeah.
Death is #2. So, you know, if anyone's ever had to do a speech at a wedding, you know, or a eulogy or something,
Right.
the majority of people just thinking about that will start sweating and their heart starts racing and they feel their, you know, their stress levels rising. Well, there's absolutely no immediate threat. There's no environmental threat in the room. It's all in your head.
Right.
You know, we've all, I think, had some experience like that before. You start, you know, you see a commercial on TV for, you know, whatever type of food, say pizza, and then you start salivating and you get hungry all of a sudden, right? Because you're just thinking about that. So the mind-body kind of response, it always seemed, even 20 years ago, seemed very silly to me that it was considered largely, by and large, by the scientific community as a sort of a fringe metaphysical thing. It's like we can't measure it or we don't know how to, so it's not real.
Sure.
And so that's just an example of how thoughts are, you know, things in terms of how you could measure the impact of a thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how does a polygraph work?
Right.
Right? I mean, so if you're hooked up to a polygraph and I'm asking you a series of questions, and if I'm trained to interpret it, what am I looking for? I'm looking for a stress response.
Yeah.
Well, why are you having a stress? Because you lied, right? And you know you're hooked up to a machine and you might get busted. So, you know, so like that's another example of a mind-body response. So, you know, there's still, you know, sort of dovetailing this or weaving into more of where it comes into toxicity, even in a purely physical way. So you can have toxic thoughts, which I think you've already covered, right? Like you've talked about that a lot. And so automatic negative thinking, it becomes reflexive. And that's where, you know, as you and I were discussing before we started this, that starts to even, you know, siphon off a person's, you know, free will as far as, you know, their perception is they're making all their own decisions. In reality, 90% of what they do in any given day is just on autopilot, right?
Yeah.
And it's sort of, you're going down a positive highway or the opposite, you know, you're heading towards the cliff.
Yeah.
But where this has a real physical impact, and this is not hypothetical, there's quite an abundance of peer-reviewed published literature on this. But just to give you a kind of a level up for the example of where that can go, if you have, let's say, if you're caught up in a habit or a pattern of negative thinking, right? Or you're just sort of that, you know, some people just, it's their persona. They're always high strung, they're always on edge, they're always sort of stressed out.
Right.
To untangle that, it's a bilateral relationship. In other words, I could inject you with pro-inflammatory signaling molecules, you know, called pro-inflammatory cytokines. And I've shown these in some of the classes that I've done. You could have never had experienced depression or anxiety before, and if I inject you every day with small quantities of these inflammatory signaling molecules, you will become depressed, and you can have full-blown panic attacks, and you could even start obsessing over the idea of taking your own life. I mean, now,
Right.
that is very important to understand, because we know, and it's been known for a long time, that just stress from being sort of out of control of your thoughts, right? So we have the mind, and if you don't really train and put a lot of effort into harnessing your mind, then it's, you know, you get into a stressed state psychologically without any real threat right here in the environment, then you're going to crank up your levels of pro-inflammatory signaling molecules or pro-inflammatory cytokines. And that is going to then elicit the fight or flight response. It's going to trigger a physiological stress response.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of goes back to someone worrying about an upcoming speech and getting sweaty palms and a racing heartbeat and all of that. But if that becomes your everyday life, right? Like, it's not this speech you're giving this Sunday or whatever, you know, that becomes your day, your job, or your relationships at home, or whatever the case may be, and it drags out for months and months or years.
Yeah.
Then now we're looking at, you know, losing your detoxification capacity. And just to clarify too, for anyone who wants to look this up, if you went to the National Library of Medicine, let's say, or any kind of Medline or online journal search, if you go to the medical literature and you search for detoxification, you'll come up with little to nothing.
Right.
But if you put in biotransformation, which is just the technical term for detoxification,
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of articles, right?
Yeah.
So like
Great.
so just to sort of
Gotta know the
clarify
Google
in case
search, right?
yeah, in case someone's googling it, because
Yeah.
I think there is confusion out there and people read and then they'll see controversy online or whatever,
Right.
and you'll see a lot of trained medical professionals say, it's just there's nothing to it. There's the standard line is there's no research to support whatever. Usually coming from the people who've never looked, but that's just as a clarification for terminology. So biotransformation
Right.
is the technical term for detoxification. So of course, most of that, your primary organ there is your liver.
Yeah.
And then of course excretion through the skin, like through our sweat, through breath, and through bowel and bladder. But in a chronically stressed state, if you need to yet don't, really put a lot of effort daily into harnessing sort of the monkey brain or whatever you want to call it, then that will lead to easily and very readily measurable changes in your physiological function, and that will actually detract over time from your ability to biotransform, which is to say detox.
Yeah.
And now, if we live, where we're filming this, that we're in a toxic environment,
Yeah.
right? Nothing you can do about it. I mean, you could move to a cleaner environment, but you're going to be going, into the far away from where other people
Yeah.
live. And
Rainforest.
the reality is, you could go from the North to the South Pole. You can go live in the top of Mount Everest. You can't get away from stuff like phthalates from plastic. It's
Right.
in single-celled organisms all around the world.
Yeah.
We've really done a number on the planet as a species, and so the point is to minimize where you can, right? Like take the steps that you need to, and the things that you can control in your immediate environment. And we'll talk about more of those, but that's really the way to focus. So your capacity to detox or biotransform is much higher, but you can't just do that by just taking pills, right? There are no
Right.
drugs to do it. Glutathione, is given as an intravenous infusion in hospital, or you can take liposomal glutathione, which, I use a lot in practice. That's your primary detoxification agent. We can dig into that if you'd like.
Sure.
But that's just one example. Glutathione depletion, where you can't make enough to keep up with environmental demands. Well, a lot of that's genetically pre-programmed. There's some people, some researchers estimate that maybe up to 40% of our population is they have genetic polymorphisms or sort of glitches in the genome, and they can't make enough glutathione to keep up with environmental demands, which is really scary
Right.
to think about, especially if they don't know about it and they don't know enough to support it through supplementation.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely a mind-body response, if you play that out in the long run, especially if you're talking about chronic stressors or toxicity of the mind, how that will lead to toxicity of the body is just through that mechanism. Chronic fight or flight response is chronic inflammation. You're going to massively change your hormonal system. You're going to create hormonal imbalance, and you're going to see things like sex hormone binding globulin, which is easily measured on a regular blood test, goes up with stress and inflammation. It'll bind too much of, say in men, your testosterone, so not enough is released to act on a cellular level. Or in women, it'll create estrogen dominance, or in a thyroid situation, it could create a hypothyroid state, even though the thyroid's fine, and on and on and on, right? We go on for days about all of the possible outcomes of just that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because, and I know you probably don't remember this. You see a lot of people, but one of the things that that I came to visit you for was this was years ago, as I began to experience a big decrease in my physical, like just strength and endurance, the brain fog, and it's kind of funny, and we can laugh about it because I'm beyond that now.
Yeah.
It was I came to you and said that I saw in the commercial, the low T commercial. I'm like, hey, over half of those I have, and I can't get past this brain fog, I guess you'd call it. And then the physical thing was really odd for me, and I came to you and we talked about it, did some tests, and I had that was my problem, is my testosterone was fine, but my body was converting it to estradiol, if I remember.
Yeah, estradiol,
ultimately estrogen. And so my joke to you was, so you're telling me I'm turning into a woman, right?
Yeah.
And so, but there were things that we did that reversed that. But the main thing was that it was chronic stress driven.
Yes.
And so, uh, you know, it's good to have people that shoot straight, which you did with me, you know, and said that you told me something has to change, or statistically in 10 years, you're going to be dead or debilitated from a heart attack or a stroke. So it's sort of like you said, is realizing that sometimes we have to do something about our health before it becomes, before we're forced into the hands of the
pathology.
the acute need for medicine, where you're on an operating table or you're having surgery or something like that.
Absolutely.
And so, so even when we talk about stress, I mean, the scriptures come to my mind about don't worry, in everything, go to God in prayer and supplication. Don't concern yourself with tomorrow. Tomorrow has enough trouble for itself.
Right.
Kind of stay in the now, stay in the today. But it is interesting to talk about that, about the stress thing, because I think everybody that I know would say they're stressed. You say to people, "How you doing?" And some people say fine, whether they are or aren't, being polite. The other part is as common as the response of "I'm doing well" or "I'm fine" is busy.
Yeah.
So we readily accept this idea of busy.
Right.
And I think that, we're busy, we're productive, we're doing the things. I'm busy, but I'm usually busy doing things I love to do.
Yeah.
The problem is when I think that busy creeps into the pattern of thought. So constantly busy in thought, constantly the brain racing,
Yep.
Lack of productivity. So tons of expended energy, lack of productivity, which then gets into what we talk about, that cycle where now emotionally, I'm not seeing the output for the amount of effort.
Yep.
So now I'm right back to thinking other thoughts that that could be right or wrong, and so how do you take that concept of busy? What's a real answer to solving that, the slowing down of your mind and the ability to kind of get control, because it's hard, it's hard to get control of your thoughts when your mind is running around like a,
Absolutely.
I don't know, I could use a farm analogy, a chicken or greased pig or something, but I mean, for me, my mind can get so race so much that it's hard to even grapple with my own thoughts because they seem to be on autopilot. What can you do? What are some of the answers for that problem?
That's a good question, and that's I think I think that's probably the most common fundamental problem or underlying problem that leads the majority of people into me or to my office. Just like in your case, it was, not that that's what led you there, but eventually, you sort of got hit, out of with this force, like this reality of here's the physical manifestation of the chronic stress, right?
Yeah.
It's right there in black and white on a blood chemistry. You can feel it. It's not in your head.
No.
And so that's that's the trick right there, is that it always eventually is in your head. Like that's the thing that's hard to untangle from a clinical standpoint. So that question that you just asked, sort of, how do you break out of that vicious cycle? In my experience anyway, in almost all cases, it's a multi-pronged approach, right? So racing thoughts. It's one of the most common things that I see on my intake questionnaires, symptom questionnaires, and it's on there for that reason. So, I'll have like a 0 meaning never, 1 is sometimes, 2 is fairly frequently, 3 is all the time, 0 to 3. So some of those questions that I ask, and I look at those very carefully when a new person's coming in or if I'm following up, and that's one of the questions, is trouble turning off your mind when trying to relax. Sort of, that sort of racing thought and never feeling overwhelmed, even at things you never used to feel overwhelmed by.
Right.
That sort of state of worry, I sort of splice in a bunch of questions throughout that questionnaire so I can really get a good handle on that, because and you and I were speaking just previously about mindfulness training using technology like the Muse, neurofeedback to induce a meditative state. And people sort of, and I think a lot by and large shrink from that word. I think they need to come up with a new word. So it's just mind training or brain training or whatever.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it is, and there's so much evidence now for it, pre and post testing and so on. But
Right.
I think that is absolutely crucial. As in my experience with thousands of patients and watching thousands of people attempt and fail or attempt and succeed, usually after multiple attempts, but finally breaking out of that, I think that's critical. The other thing though that in my experience, and there's good evidence behind this, I think is absolutely fundamental is physical movement. And I even don't call it exercise because there's a negative connotation to that
Yeah.
word, right? People
Yeah, who
will
wants
shrink
to do
back.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they associate it with pain. A lot of people do. But
Yeah.
it's that idea that exercise means suffering for X amount of hours a week, and that's a myth. And there's abundance of research that's really sort of exciting because it sort of lets most of us off the hook in terms of what does it take. And you've heard me speak about this before publicly, where my goal for folks is to look, you got to set aside 30 minutes, 5 days a week, as sort of like a minimum. If you can't do that, then we need to stop right there. I mean, why is your life in such a state that you can't find 30 minutes,
Yeah.
5 days a week? How much TV are you watching? That kind of thing. And I don't mean that condescendingly either.
Right.
It's the reality on the ground. It's like, look at the weather recently. So, it's like, well, I don't want to go out and walk in this stuff. Well, you got to buy some clothing then that will allow you to. It's like that's my grandfather. I've talked about all the time, 91 years old. Like there's no bad weather, just the wrong clothing attitude, right? Doesn't matter if it's below zero, pouring rain or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just what you do.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I pick up my toothbrush in the morning, I think, I should have probably bought a new one a few weeks ago. I don't decide not to brush, right? It's sort of like you get on with it and then you make it so it's more tolerable, or go buy some equipment that you could do it in your own home, or pay $10 a month and join a gym, whatever the case is. So the point of that is that has to be a top priority, and there's a real physical reason for this. Because if you are in that state, right, like of wind-up, so we could say, a distressful wind-up state,
Yeah.
we know biochemically you're going to be throwing those inflammatory signaling molecules, cytokines. You're going to be changing all of these endocrine functions. You're going to change your immunology. You're going to be more susceptible to illness, which only drives the inflammatory thing even farther and interferes with your quality of life and lifestyle farther. The point of that is that, we're hardwired, that we get in a stressed state that, for the majority of time that humans been on the planet, that would be like an immediate threat. Someone's attacking you, or the predator is attacking, whatever. And that's either, it's over within about an hour, because you're either lunch or you're got away, right? So it's like that kind of,
Yeah.
and we're not at all set up to sustain this onslaught on a daily basis, much less all day long for hours a day. And if you think about it too, and this is again not hypothetical, but if you're in that state, your body, so your mind is now perceiving a threat, and so your brain is now telling your body, sort of marshaling all these defenses, so you're gonna have maximum output, right, for fighting or fleeing. So if you have to fight for your life, you'll be stronger and more impressive than you could ever imagine. You've heard of the death grip, right? People can hang for extraordinary periods of time. And so you get kind of a super burst of strength and speed and quick reflexes and all of that. But all of those things, whether you're fighting or fleeing, they require a burst of activity, right? Like physical, vigorous movement that's sustained even for as little as 10 minutes.
Yeah.
10, 15 minutes. So that's the good news, is that, walking for a half an hour does a lot, right? But if you actually go and do 10 minutes of resistance exercise, or if you go for interval training where you just do 20 to 30 minutes where you walk for 5 minutes, run for 30 seconds, walk for 4 or 5 minutes, run for 30, that kind of thing. You get a lot out of that, and if you only do it a few times a week, you're going to go a long way to mitigating that stress response and that stress physiology. That's a fundamental thing. I really question whether or not, short of a miracle, I don't think it's possible to get out of it without that. Like, I think that's that fundamental. You have to close the loop.
Right.
right? You're prepared for vigorous action. When that never comes, the off switch never gets thrown,
Right.
right? It's interesting, your heart actually produces atrionetic protein that goes into the brain and switches off that stress response, the amygdala of the brain. I mean, it's, we have this heart-brain connection, we have the gut-brain connection. Intuitively
Yeah.
know this, right? Because where do you feel it when you're stressed, you're, or sad, or, or
Yeah.
grief-stricken? It's, broken-hearted. What does your gut tell you? I have a gut feeling about this.
Yeah.
So intuitively, I think for as long as, human language has been around, we have evidence for people referring to that without knowing anything about the real biochemistry. So I think, spending time training either with an app or a biofeedback or just on your own, we were talking about, just, training different mindfulness techniques, mindfulness meditation, using that and really prioritizing that, which is so odd because like you're just asking yourself to take 10 minutes a day to do nothing, right?
Yeah.
So it should be the easiest thing in the world to
Yeah.
get to people to do, but it isn't. And if you build that into your routine, it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but with time and repetition, you get good at it like any other skill. I think if you do that and then you prioritize at least a short period, whether it's even 15, 20 minutes of vigorous movement, strength training, therabands, light dumbbells, it doesn't have to be anything, you don't have to go join a CrossFit gym or anything really extreme. There's nothing wrong with that, but you don't have to do that. If you put those things together, then you're well on your way there. And then I think, did you want to talk about some of the dietary, like just the simple hacks?
Yeah,
Like sort of
but kind of to sum that up, because like what I'm hearing is that when I activate that stress response, that my body's primed.
Yes.
It's primed for physical action.
Yes.
And I'll just add, because I've heard you teach it before, that really the executive functions of your mind just kind of go away.
Yeah.
Which would be the brain fog, right? Because I'm always ready for this. It's hard for me to process information because my body's not tuned for that.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm ready to do something. I mean, either way.
And
if
not
I fight,
calculus.
I'm exerting energy.
Yeah.
If I flee, I'm exerting energy. So either way, I've spent energy, and so it's kind of like I'm primed for that. And until that happens, in some way, that switch is never going to get, never really going to get tripped. I can creep my way back there, I guess, eventually. But the best way to do it is to satisfy what the body's after anyway.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to just throw in there. I think you mentioned earlier that you've discussed a bit about neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And so just to throw that in that context, there's a huge risk in not taking the steps to break the cycle because of neuroplasticity. There's positive plasticity and there's negative, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't, the sooner the better, because the longer you go in this wound up state, the more plastic it becomes. Right, which is not to say that you can never get out of it. Going back to your earlier question there about, can we ever get back to, sort of optimum and that sort of thing? And I'd say generally speaking, yes. Just, I mean, anyone who's been in any kind of practice, even resembling mine in any way, for any period of time, will tell you we've all got those miracle stories, right?
Yeah.
And I just had it's always a great day, when those things happen. And I just had one Monday, yesterday. And where, just to give you an example, a person that I followed up with on Monday morning, I hadn't seen her since August, just this past August. And she came in July, total melting down, like a full physiological sort of, dismantling was going on. And anyway, turned out to be, a toxicity issue, right? It started with overgrowth in the GI tract, led to massive detrimental impact on the liver, the ability to detox, and so on. And anyway, long story short, it was a pretty simple protocol, but she did all the things, right? And it wasn't anything that dramatic, but she did it exactly. She was one of those very meticulous, sort of did it very rigidly.
Good patient.
Yeah, what I call a good patient. Yeah. And the first thing she said, which is like I said, it's always a great day when this happens. But she sat down and I thought she was coming back because there were problems, because I hadn't seen her. I gave her the protocol. I had a 1 month follow up by email. Things were going better, and then 60 days later, another follow up. Things are going great by then, right? And now this is like a few months later, or a couple months later. And so I thought, well, she's probably, maybe it's backtracking, but she was really just there to ask a few questions and also to tell me this. And we sat down and I said, so how have things been, sort of catch me up. And she said, when I came to see you in August, I was planning my funeral. And now I'm training from her couch to 5K. She has
Wow.
0 symptoms, full function,
Yeah.
lost 20 pounds. She's perfectly fit and feeling great.
Yeah.
So that goes to, you can have a person who is in August, putting their affairs in order and preparing, like accepting this, that she's 55 years old.
Yeah.
Right? And so, and to think that, well, this is it. Like, here we go. We're descending. You know what I mean? And people start to take that on, and they're as if they're coming in for a landing, and in a grave site. So I mean, that's that kind of turnaround. Anyone who's been doing like what I've been doing for any amount of time could tell you they've got tons of those stories, right?
Right.
So it gives me, I guess the point of all that is I have pretty great amount of reverence for the human body and for the innate intelligence of our physiology. And I've watched people so many times come back from the brink, right? People that have that were all but written off, and people that I secretly didn't think could recover.
Yeah.
I never say that, right?
Right.
Because it'd be stupid. I mean, you don't want to, because you never know, right? I'm humble enough to know that, like that I don't really, no doctor really knows.
Right.
If they tell you, sorry, you've got 6 months to live, they don't really know that, right? And there's outliers all over the place. And they shouldn't really do that, because that's even, they call that parking meter syndrome in some of the medical literature, because the person will actually expire
They'll believe
at
it.
about that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there goes back to the beliefs, sort of
Yeah.
taking, manifesting pretty powerfully. Have you ever heard of, in your research with that other neuroscientist, they literally call it voodoo death? Have you ever heard of that term?
No.
So it's actually like, it's written in, it's in textbooks in like physiological psychology texts and stuff. But the basis of that is, I mean, there are all of these interesting examples. And I happen to remember one out of a textbook from undergraduate school. It just stands out of my mind, but it was a physiological psychology textbook, and there was case examples of that, and they were talking about, I think there were maybe a group of scientists that were down somewhere looking at hunter-gatherer populations, somewhere in the middle of the rainforest in Brazil or something.
Right.
But the point of the story is that there were young children kind of following them around, watching them there, taking samples of, sort of insects and plants and so on. And there was I think it was literally like a gooseberry bush, and the kids, one of the kids, or some of the kids, watched the researchers eating these berries. And then they ended up eating some themselves, and then one of the elders from the tribe saw them do it and just totally lost it, because these are some kind of sacred, not in a sort of a mystical fruit,
Right.
that it's one that they believed to be deadly, which it wasn't. And all of the other people were fine, but the whole village was in mourning in real time and preparing this little girl's funeral. And and the mother's literally wailing with grief, like as if she's already gone. The girl died.
Yeah.
It's like if you pull your ripcord and you don't have a backup chute and it doesn't open, you're probably going to die before you hit the ground, right?
Yeah.
Because you firmly believe you're about to.
Yeah.
And those are extreme examples, but everything in that arena exists on a spectrum. So you have those extreme examples, but what if you're just on this part of the spectrum where you harbor a particular belief, and you manifest that through your micro actions, right? It's like those little things you do or don't do. And then it's also, and that's where things get really really kind of amazing to contemplate, because we're now talking about, controlling your mind and sort of wrestling it into submission.
Yeah.
And that's where I said I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I think you have to take direct action on mastering your mind and your thoughts, and you create different habits. And now there's technology to help us do that, which makes it easier for a lot of folks.
Sure.
You also have to move your body. You have to. It's not an option. It's not like, well, it would be nice if I did or I could. It's not an option.
Yeah.
And then I think beyond that, and you've heard me, you've heard me do this at other classes and so on, but it's worth repeating. If we're talking about detox, from a physical standpoint, I think that you have to absolutely talk about autophagy, which, have you talked about that in this series so far?
No, that's why I have you here. I don't
Okay.
even know if I can say it right.
Yeah. So autophagy is, and we don't have to get into the weeds on that, but Auto means self, and phagy means to eat. So, right, it literally means to eat yourself or eat thyself. So it's on a cellular level, it's cellular cannibalism. The fellow who discovered this about 16, 17 years ago, he got the Nobel Prize just in 2016 for Nobel Prize in Medicine for the discovery, because it has huge implications across all kinds of disciplines in medicine and so on. But the gist is this, that first of all, to stay in a chronically stressed state and to not activate the physical system, right? You have to activate your muscle cells to activate your osteoblasts that lay down more bone and prevent bone density loss. You have to do that so your ANP from the heart helps to switch off your stress response in the brain. And we could go on and on all night about all the different things that happen. There's you've heard me talk about BDNF, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. That comes from physical activity. And if you don't have that, you don't grow and maintain connectivity in the neurons in the brain, and you're just begging for dementia, right? And so, and on we go. Autophagy, though, is just this act of sort of like a spring cleaning or whatever, but you want this to happen on a pretty regular basis on a cellular level. I would say that the gist of it, a simpler way to think about it or explain this, is that certain cells inevitably will fail to die when they were supposed to. So we have a programmed cell death. Right. They call that apoptosis. And for a variety of reasons, things go wrong, environment, again, stress, mind-body reactions and all of that. You can interfere with that process, and so you have these cells that are like zombie cells, really. They're called senescent cells, technically, and which senescence is just aging. So they're older cells, but they should have been gone, and they're not. But they don't just hang out and take up space. They screw things up, right? They'll keep producing, making proteins or, neurotransmitters or whatever the case is. So whatever tissue these senescent cells are in, they can really mess up the network of activity that all these similar cells that make up a particular tissue type are supposed to perform. Yeah. So autophagy is this process that we have, which is built right in and designed. So it's meant to be this process of cleanup where the surrounding healthy cells recognize a senescent cell, like a zombie cell, and they kill it. Yeah. Right? And they eat it, actually. They strip it for parts and recycle parts. And they'll actually turn, like you can imagine it like little Pac-Men, right? And they'll gobble up those senescent cells. And those are the cells, by the way, that have the highest probability of becoming cancerous, right? Right. And so it's a pretty important thing. So all that is to say, I would say the most fundamental thing that is known today, at least, is time-restricted eating. All right. And so it's more important, and this is hard to even say because of where some people will take it, but as far as what their diet consists of, but it's technically more important when you eat than what you eat, right? Now, certainly you could push that, to the extreme. I have patients that live on red meat and cigarettes. That diet is always going to be, a carcinogenic diet and so on. Right. But even the person who's literally eating nothing but fast food, processed food all day, excess calories, excess refined sugars, bad trans fats and all that stuff, that's still horrible, and it's still a massive insult to the body, right? Right. So I think that reaches people sometimes too, and they stop and think about that. It's an insult to the creator, right? I mean, that's in the context of this. It's like a slap in the face, right? So It's like, here's the temple, and I'm just going to treat it like an outhouse. I mean, that's sort of like, that's basically it. No maintenance.
I'm stealing that, by the way, forever.
There
I'm
you
taking
go.
that.
That's yours. So I think the least a person should be able to do, and we've talked about this before too, which has always been amazing to me that it's this hard to do for a lot of people, is time-restricted eating. So anyone can Google that. Sometimes it's referred to as time-restricted feeding because it originated with animal studies, but that is just to say, really simply, you choose an 11-hour window out of the day, right? And all of your calories should be consumed in that 11 hours. That's it. Right? Water any time of day is fine. And they stretch it. It doesn't seem to matter if it's even non-water, just no calories. So black coffee, or a coffee that's sweetened with a little stevia, if you must, or Lohan Go, monk fruit, etc. I would not use aspartame. I do not use that, or sucralose, which is bad for your gut flora and all of that. So 0-calorie coffee, tea, herbal tea, water, the flavored waters that are popular now, LaCroix and other brands like that. Yeah. All those things are fine. but constrain your calorie intake to 11 hours. Now, sitting here talking about that, doesn't it sound ridiculously simple? I mean, I don't know if, I mean, I still think it does. I still am amazed at the number of people who just cannot do that. I mean, they just, really the word is will not do that, right? It's like, it's not like they physically can't do it, but it's been an incredible thing for me over years now, and literally thousands of people, that I've sort of put that in as a stipulation in a particular protocol, meant to steer people towards recovery. And it's a remarkable thing. I mean, it's all sort of the strata of society, right? It's the ultra wealthy to the polar opposite, and all levels of education, and both genders, and all of that. And it's just, to me, is amazing. It speaks to how addictive the processed foods are in the dietary pattern, right? But that's it, because going back to autophagy, it's the very least you do. You get a bit of autophagy having a 13-hour downtime in the 24-hour cycle. Right? So constrain your calorie intake. So if you have your first calories at 8 in the morning, then you better be done by 7 at night. Right? So for me, I don't eat before, I have no calories before 11 a.m. And that gives me till 10 p.m., which is pretty late. I mean, it's not the greatest to be eating that late at night, right? But even when I'm traveling, or if I'm out at a dinner or something like that, where there is an occasion where it might be 9:30, 10 o'clock by the time, I'm still following in that window. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, at least based on the animal models, we know that one night a week is a massive deviation. It doesn't seem to matter, which is great. And I hope that extrapolates to the humans. But from the rodents to the humans, it's extrapolated exactly, right, on par. And it's an ongoing area of research, but it looks pretty good that if you could at least constrain yourself 5-6 nights a week, then you should be fine. But that is crucial in the discussion of detoxification, because it's another deal breaker, I would say, with great confidence based on all the published research that's out there. If you fail to do that, you're never going to succeed. You could do all these other things right that we've already mentioned, that we'll mention other things, and you're never going to succeed if you don't do that. It's just it's a fundamental thing. It's like if you don't move enough, you're never going to succeed, right? You don't harness, you don't put some serious effort into mindfulness training, meditation, etc., some shape or form, you're never going to get all the way there. Because it's like, that's the multi-pronged approach that I mentioned. I think those are the most fundamental things, actually, is to get sort of on your, like when you think of your chart, it's, the actions, let's say, just to even use examples, like physical activity, right? There's an action, like a physical action, but you've got your thinking, right? And it is under your control. And then eventually you come around to those emotions, right? Like it's a more difficult thing to imagine manipulating your own emotions, right? You know what I mean? Like those sort of are a manifestation of these other two things. They'll change and follow in tow naturally. And then of course it helps if within those 11 hours you have some real food, like hopefully mostly real food. I mean, it's like diet doesn't have to be very complicated. I had every day I have examples of these things, and just today, and another patient of mine, Patrick, hadn't seen him in a few months, and he just happened to mention that. He said, last time I saw you, he asked a few questions. We had this brief conversation, and I said, just do this, and then next time you come back, ask me again and tell me how that's going. And all he did was time restrict, and then I asked him also to have one large salad a day, and not just iceberg lettuce and shredded cheese, like so throw broccoli, cauliflower, some bell peppers, some cucumbers, whatever you like, right? And expand your palate a little, but just have this really one large salad somewhere in your 11-hour time frame, and beyond that, do whatever you want. That's it, right? And I'm not even going to and we'll talk later about your diet Mountain Dew and all of that, but like without even getting to that, and I didn't even remember having this conversation because just the sheer number, and it's been a few months. So while he was in the office, he happened to mention, he said, remember last time you told me to do? I said, yeah. And he wasn't a very heavy guy, but he maybe had like 10 extra pounds on him. They were gone. He had some areas on his skin that were he had recurrent acne, gone. His heartburn's gone. His energy levels are super high. His mood is better. His sleep is better. And very rarely in the medical research will you find any study where they get 100% of an effect on anything. Like I don't think it's ever happened ever in pharmacological research, for example. And that's one example. In the Salk Institute in California, where they took, I think it was 257 obese adults, men and women, from 40 to 60 or something. Anyway, a sizable group of people, and all they did was get them to self-select an 11-hour window. They might have done 10 hours in that, but the same research scientist is saying 11 should be the max. Anyway, that's all they did. And after 4 months, they followed up with them, and 100% of them lost weight, and 100% of them reported better sleep. And after a whole year later, after this whole thing was done, when they checked in with them again, 100% of them were still following their same eating window, because it's easy. It gets easier all the time, right? It's just what you do.
Yeah.
And they just continued to see these positive results. And that right there speaks to the power of biotransformation or detoxification. And I think that's a deal breaker. I think if you don't work at all those things. One last thing about the racing mind before we move on to another one, but biochemically there's a little bit of a trick that I think folks could benefit from. A little bit of a brain hack, or however you want to think of it. But from a nutrition standpoint, because of course you've got a variety of drugs to choose from. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
Whether they're prescribed or otherwise.
A large variety.
Right. Yeah. And whether they're legal or otherwise. I mean, some people it's a couple glasses of wine at night as a nightcap. Well, first of all, that wrecks your quality of your sleep structure, right? So you're not getting away with it. And also, it's not the best habit, right? It's certainly not like the healthiest thing you can do, but just the sleep impact alone makes it kind of a negative thing. And there's a huge, I think it's always worth taking just a brief moment for anyone who wants to look at this. Dr. Daniel Kripke from University of Chicago is a neuroscientist, studies sleep and the impact of sleep on health, which is absolutely fundamental, right? Absolutely. With a broken circadian rhythm, normal sleep-wake cycle, with abnormal quality sleep, you're on your way out. There's you could do everything else right, and that will break a person. I don't care. You can't train yourself to get by. You hear people, I only need 5 hours and I'm good.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with that. You're on your way. It's the classic. People use examples like Ronald Reagan was famous or infamous for that, but he ends up with dementia. Margaret Thatcher, same thing.
Yeah.
It's just there's no exceptions known in the medical literature. Ambien, Lunesta, they call those hypnotic drugs. I would just say this, that they're really incredibly, I would even say shockingly dangerous.
Yeah.
And if anyone wants to look at a real world renowned researcher, Dr. Kripke, he actually put a website up called thedarksideofsleepingpills.com.
Yeah.
And anyone who's on those things should look at that. It's just jaw-dropping, where 18 doses a year, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like triples your dose, triples your risk of cancer, and many times over multiplies your risk of all causes of death. You're more likely to kill yourself because of the depression that it causes, or die in an accident because your brain's not working right and you shouldn't be behind the wheel. So all of those things. But so what I want to say is just that anyone could use this without seeing any kind of doctor, really. The only caveat here is you shouldn't take this alongside those other drugs, right? If you're already on sleep medication, or if you're on Neurontin, gabapentin, you got to be careful. So talk to your doctor as always. However, phenobute, which is GABA, which is a calming neurotransmitter in the brain that's structured to cross the blood-brain barrier, you can buy over the counter. I use it a lot clinically, and a lot with my regular patients, because when I see that there's abnormal sleep or that's a problem, we can't move on until we fix that, right? So even if it's someone coming in with a simple, say more of a, chiropractic type problems like back pain, if I see they have back pain, it's any kind of chronic or recurrent nature to it, but then their sleep is broken, we don't fix that, they're never going to get better, right? There's no point in doing anything else. So phenobute, which is again GABA that's structured across the blood-brain barrier, has been around since the early 60s and has a good track record, and it's good safe track record, and it's technically a natural compound, so you can get it over the counter in supplemental form. Yeah. And unless you're doing some of those other medications, the vast majority of people who do that that's another thing that they can, and again, I still don't think you should use that as like this lifelong thing, right? Yeah. This is how I'm going to compensate for what I'm not doing by taking these things. Just because they're natural doesn't mean that that's still the best. You should be good on your own. But as a training device to retrain that normal circadian rhythm, that's about the best thing I've ever used. And so I'll use some complexes that have, a little extra vitamin B6, which can facilitate better sleep. Some of them have a little melatonin in there, valerian root, phosphatidylserine. So
Yeah.
these complexes can be very effective, and I always try to use them as a bit of a training device. Once we get a person in a good rhythm and good quality sleep, we take it away,
Gotcha.
right? Because they don't need it to keep taking it.
Well, so let's dive into the supplement thing. Obviously you could do a month-long class on it, right? But the idea here is that some of these things that we're in, we create environments in our body and rhythms and patterns. Like you said, a lot of things that we do is out of reflex. One of the main things I had noticed that was a little disheartening, because I like to think of myself as a fairly disciplined person, but when I started changing the way I ate, even the time restricted eating, I would find myself opening cabinet doors where the food was with no intent of eating. Just, I would walk into a room and open the cabinet and look and think, it's not time to eat. And it was just
Habit.
I didn't do it
Right.
going there looking for. It was like I would catch myself with the cabinet door open,
Yes.
just looking. I did it this week.
Yeah.
I opened the refrigerator and I guess I was just taking inventory, because I had no intention of eating anything. And so, so we create these things, these patterns in our, obviously through decisions in our mind. Then they become thoughts and patterns or habits, right?
Yep.
Which have brain structure to them.
Absolutely.
That's how they form, right?
Yep.
And then they lead into actions or even emotions,
That's right.
So we're always in this cycle, right? So is it fair to say that whether it's in the extreme cases, prescription type stuff, or it's supplementation, that there really is sometimes just a need to introduce something external that changes your body, like so that you can reform, right?
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I think that's more than fair. And even that's an interesting thing you're hitting on is, and I think that, my own learning curve, clinically speaking, just, working with people and trying to help people over the years and trying different strategies, different personality types and living, life situations, so on. I, without even really thinking about it, I realized one day, a very long time ago, that it seemed like with the best successes that I had, like where I was able to really figure things out, without even really realizing I was doing it, I was sort of evolving into this practice of giving people these mini trials. It's a mindset of like, here, I want you to do this for just 2 weeks, right? And I know it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a wild change for you, and it's going to be hard, but do you think you could do it? I mean, there's a decent chance this could lead us to the solution to whatever ails you, right?
Yeah.
And I found that and I started doing it myself. I think it's a positive thing to just change it up, right? From time to time. Be mindful, again, sort of just really meaning aware, just being present time conscious of just the daily habits and routines, even if there's nothing wrong with them. It doesn't have to be that there's something, wrong. But I think that, metabolic flexibility by revolving your dietary patterns regularly is very important. I think there's great evidence for that. And so I think of the same thing spiritually, psychologically, and so on, is having a flexibility there. Just what you talked about, and earlier you and I were just briefly talking about fasting. You've been doing some pretty hardcore fasting yourself. And that's where I think one of the greatest things about that, for me at least, and I know hearing from a lot of other people, is just what you just said, is that you catch yourself standing there with the refrigerator door open, staring into it, and then you realize, right, because it sort of triggers that awareness, like, oh yeah, I forgot, I'm not doing that today.
Yeah.
But then you realize, it's almost like, somebody playing the piano, who's quite an accomplished musician, can be playing and having a conversation with somebody else where they're literally they're not thinking about it, right? Or we've all had, anyone who drives, we've all had those experiences, I think, where something's on your mind and you go from point A to point B, you know, you went through how many turns and stoplights, you could be shifting a, you know, stick shift, and you don't remember how you got there.
Yeah.
Right? And that's pretty wild when you think about it. It's amazing how the brain can work, you know, structurally and physiologically. But that's why you mentioned that those things manifest, right? They become physical norms,
Yeah.
and that's the absolute truth. And those are good examples of it. But what if it's something that's not necessarily a bad thing? Like, what if you have a really healthy diet, let's say dietary pattern, and you eat really cleanly, you eat mostly plants, you know, and you know, you eat unprocessed foods, say 90% of the time, or even 100% of the time. That's great. But if you don't switch it up from time to time, change that pattern, you lose metabolic flexibility. And also, I think, you know, going back to fasting and detox, for people, if they can work themselves up there, you know, where they can start with just time restricted eating until that's easy, right? And then maybe shrink it down to maybe 8 hours a day for a while so their blood glucose is stable. Then try to go 24 hours twice a week, you know, and if they, after a while, that's easy. And when that's easy, they get to where you're getting to, which is now going days at a time, right? And there's a great body of literature behind that, of course, but the primary reason that works so well is it's triggering stress response genes, right? So stress response genetics, and it brings out these dormant but very powerful, very robust physiological responses that are meant to keep us alive. I mean, so just think about that. I mean, you're activating mechanisms that cause sweeping changes throughout your metabolism, right? We have about 3,000 to 4,000 factors that make up they're called metabolomics. So nobody understands them all yet, right? Like how they're interconnected. It's like this gigantic web or network. So you get these sweeping rejuvenative changes to your entire metabolic system. You're activating all of the most robust systems that we've been endowed with, that is meant to keep us alive, right? Yeah. And the crazy thing to me about that is that, you know, without doing certain drugs like metformin, which can activate a lot of those same things, or a plant berberine that I use supplementally can activate a lot of those, but really nothing like it. Nothing like starving can do that, right? Yeah. And that's why once you have the ability to do it, I think for a variety of reasons, for detoxification, it's great because you get massive autophagy, right? Going back to that cellular cannibalism, that's the most robust way to do it, right? That's the best thing that we know of to do it. And then also, I think, the way I see it anyway, you get this added benefit of like just what you just mentioned, of the awareness of just how much of what we do in the day, it's like driving the car from home to work. We don't even think about it. Right. And so it's great. Yeah. It's a great exercise to just check in and check up and kind of be more aware of how many things you're doing out of just routine, and how can you make a little tweak and change it. And seeing your life as a series of experiments, I think, makes it psychologically easier to do. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's not like that. It's the New Year's resolutions fail in whatever 99% of people, right? Right. Or something like that. I mean, it's certainly
it's really high.
Yeah, like it's an impressively bad statistic, right? So, and you see it if you're a gym member, it's almost laughable, right? Like January, it's packed. You can't get on the machines. Just wait till February.
Yeah, it's until the 4th, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the that's a classic example, and I think that it's because most of us, and I think it's sort of human nature, is we regress back towards a myopic view of living, right? Yeah. And we all, and as you mentioned, and there's plenty of statistics out there just talking about our culture here, like just the average person in America views their life as more stressful than they would prefer it to be. Yeah. Right? Certainly the average person over 30 or 35 or something. And so that's that. When we look at a New Year's resolution in our mind, it's like, a year is a long time, right? So, and then you couple that with something that's unenjoyable because they think that they have to work out, and they have to sort of like leave it all there in the gym, like an hour of torture and all of that, and they're not, which is also a myth. But you couple that, but if I've found, if we have to try a bunch of things to hit on the right combination, and there's metabolic individuality, right? Like, so your optimum diet is probably not exactly the same as mine. Right. You might need a little more protein than I need, and I might need a little more fiber than you get the idea. Sure. Generalities are all the same. Like how about just less fake food, right? Like just
Yeah.
stick to real food and you're pretty good, and time restrict it and enough said, right? That's pretty much,
Yeah.
that's largely gets you there.
Yeah.
But I think that, that's the advantage psychologically. That's where I hit on that clinically. Instead of giving somebody a protocol saying, here, see you in 90 days,
Mhm.
right? It didn't take me very long to see that the compliance was not great. It was not as bad as a New Year's resolution at the gym, but it wasn't too much better than that. I mean,
Right.
people would say, almost, the majority anyway, say 3/4 would come in and say, well, the first 30 days, I was feeling pretty good, but then I had work trip come up, and then I had travel, and I found myself, and it's just, and now I'm
Yeah.
hearing all the reasons why, that
Yeah.
they couldn't adhere to this thing. If I break it down, into shorter experiments, like here, do this for 2 weeks, literally, or 3 weeks, and then let's revisit. And then, all right, so we're getting close. Okay, do this now, and do it for another 3 weeks, and then let's revisit.
Yeah.
People will, most people find it easier. So instead of having somebody telling you to do it, I think it's kind of a healthy practice for all of us to just self-impose that, just experiment.
Yeah.
Just change up the diet for a while,
Mhm.
even if it sounds gross.
Yeah.
Like the only one that I probably haven't done yet, like self-experimenting, is the carnivore diet, the all meat
All meat. Yeah.
meat diet.
Mhm.
I don't need to do that. I don't feel, I don't think I'd enjoy it, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do it for probably 2 weeks at
Yeah.
the most, because I don't want to batter myself too badly. But, and I've mentioned this before in other class, some people with really bad overgrowth or really leaky guts, and they've lost their ability to detox and all of that. For those folks, as egregious as that sounds, and certainly to a vegan, it sounds like,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
worst thing in the world. But
Completely immoral.
yeah,
Right.
but otherwise, it's certainly not the optimal human diet for any length of time. It's certainly like a lifelong diet, and of
Right.
course there are, radical sort of enthusiasts out there that think this is the greatest thing in the world forever and ever.
Mhm.
But even that, which does not seem appealing to me, I have no confidence that it's like a healthy thing long term. I'm still going to do it just to
Yeah.
see what it's like.
See what it's like. Yeah.
And it's just that mindfulness that you get built into that.
Yeah, and I think that, when we talk about it, inevitably we're going to, when we talk about body and we talk about detox, inevitably in a crowd of people, it's going to come down to what's the diet, right?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do? I love the way you teach it. And knowing you for the time I've known you, I think it's great because, it's not a secret. I'm a keto fan, right? And, just by me saying that, there's 20 people in here that think I'm going to die next week
Yeah.
because I'm doing keto
Right.
or that I'm an extremist or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, I don't do it all the time. It's not
Right.
even really feasible. I mean, I can't just keep up. I can't keep up with the meal planning, frankly. I mean,
Right.
I guess I could if I had to.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
Right.
Why would you need to?
And
Yeah.
so like that, I've done them. Like you, I've done the paleo. I've done the Atkins. I've done the, keto. I've done the, however it's shaped. I've done it. Primarily at one point for weight loss. But then it really hit me, and I think what you said earlier is huge. That it made me realize, like, how am I treating? Part of it came in that context was, how am I treating this temple, right? And really, a lot of people have a lot of different views on how they see God or whatever, but it doesn't take long to be amazed at the complexity of our body.
Yeah.
And frankly, the resilience of it. Like, because I treated my body pretty bad. I mean,
Yeah.
really. I mean, from everything from, abusing alcohol, whatever. Never really got too much into drugs, but food particularly, it's well known around here. I tell stories about it all the time. I was the fat kid. I was the guy who would, I would fix my Fruit Loops at night as a child in my bowl and put a lid on it and have it waiting for me in the morning, because I literally would be the kid. If my parents would have allowed it, I would have rolled out of bed and poured milk in the bowl and just laid there. It was just, that thing, that addictive nature of those kind of foods, I was pretty susceptible to that. And so naturally I got into a bit of a yo-yo thing. I'm kind of you talk about personalities. I'm a little bit of an addictive personality. Like, I'm in it or out of it, all that stuff, all the way down to from the sense of treating your body, um, to the point that brought me to you in the first place, which was just the years of work, and the toll it was taking structurally on my body. So that's where I met you. I mean, I was thinking about this today. We were young guys together, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the first time with you was 20 years ago or
That's
whatever,
right.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And so it's been fun watching you grow, along the way as well. And it's just, it's kind of amazing how our bodies work. But when it comes to diet, which is going to be the big question probably, I guess just kind of talk about it and break it down the way that I've heard you break it down for everybody, because it's just, it's really not as complicated as we try to make it, frankly.
That's for sure. And that's been it's kind of an amazing thing to see too over these last 20 years. Just even in that time, how many new diets, how many new books have come out, and how many new fad diets have been put forward. And some of those are really very valuable interventional diets, like the ketogenic diet. And I think that's the most misunderstood diet, clinically, medically speaking. I mean, I hear that all the time from people. Their doctors are warning them off it, and they think they're going to get kidney stones or whatever the case is. Sort of bizarre. I mean, there is a real body of scientific literature there behind that. If you want, we can dig into that too a little bit. But I'll sum it up like this. All the things that we've been talking about as far as sort of food rules, you've probably seen me presented that way before. I think this is as simple as it needs to be, which is constrain it, right? So time restrict your eating. So pick your maximum 11-hour window, figure out what works for your life, make it routine. Even if it's hard at first, it gets easy.
Yeah.
And so just with repetition. The second thing is eat mostly plants. I mean, it's just, I do not see any utility in weighing, how many grams of carbs and how many grams of fat and how many, I don't see the purpose, because I've never found clinically where that had any utility. Most people aren't going to do it. If they do it for a while, they're not going to do it long term. But it comes right down to, too, I mean, why do we even need to? Here's what anyone who's been doing this a while will tell you, or anyone who's gone through this process. If you take the average, just if we grab a bunch of people at random just passing by on the street, and let's say that, of those 10 people, 8 of them, let's say, would follow what's typically referred to as a standard American diet, right? Which is devoid of plants, something like 1.6 servings a day of fruits and vegetables for the average person, really high in refined carbohydrates. That would be like flour products, sugary products, high fructose corn syrup and so on, soft drinks and on.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, and too much meat, especially for adults who are no longer growing. There is a certain limit, above which you do push the envelope on cancer, because of a metabolic pathway called mTOR, which is called the mechanistic target of rapamycin. And that's a growth, sort of mode to be in. So if you go too heavy on animal protein, you're going to drive this mTOR pathway, and it's certainly, it's increasing your risk of cancer.
Yeah.
As well as other things. But so that is to say, I mean, if you time restrict it, constrain it to a maximum 11 hours, focus on eating mostly plants. So it's a plant-rich diet, right? Some people say a plant-based diet. Whatever you want to, think, however you want to think of it. But I think it's for the majority of people, it's really important to put an honest effort into thinking of it and being adventurous in a way that this is pretty much, I think this is incontrovertible at this point. It's non-controversial for sure in the literature, that the wider the variety of plant fibers that you consume, the better off you are.
Right.
And that's almost impossible to exaggerate, because the Human Gut Microbiome Project, right, which has yielded thousands and thousands of articles, and you've got many tens of thousands of researchers all over the world working on this stuff. I think that statement, right, what we do know is this. We know that the greater diversity in your gut microbiome, which is the roughly 4 pounds of bacteria that line your GI tract, that literally control every aspect of our physiological function, right? So it's impossible to exaggerate the importance of the gut microbiome.
Sure.
We know that environmental impacts are negative. Air pollution, Roundup, which is glyphosate sprayed all over everything, it doesn't harm any enzymes or enzymatic systems in the human body, but it wrecks our gut microbiome.
Yeah.
So it's no get out of jail free card on that stuff. Then stress and then preservatives in processed foods, right? Well, why are they preservatives? Because they're antimicrobial. So then you swallow those, what's going to do to the microbes in your gut that you rely on for every aspect of your health? So we know that the less diverse, the closer you are to a very miserable death. I mean, that's a fact.
Right.
So we know that more diversity comes with not just a high fiber diet, right? People just take a Metamucil so they can go eat their McDonald's French fries. So like that's that happens all the time.
Yeah.
But aside from that, it's not just this linear thing like, well, I'm going to bolster. I'll take 3 doses of Metamucil so I don't have to eat any of those plants.
Yeah.
This is a real way of thinking, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people have. It doesn't work that way, and the wider the variety that you have, and not just this, doesn't have to be a ridiculous abundance, but the better, more diverse the fiber types are, the more diverse your microbiome is, the healthier you are, full stop.
Yeah.
Right? Mitigating the risk of just about every disease, probably 97% of diseases known to man, other than things like Huntington's disease or Tay-Sachs or Shy-Draggers. I mean, these are pretty rare, right? Like you may go through your whole life and never know anyone or never be related to anyone that has any of those diseases.
Yeah.
Whereas the rest of all the known diseases in the Merck Manual of Medicine are manipulable. I mean, there are genetic predispositions, there's all that stuff, but that's only a predisposition, right? So environmental factors matter more. Your internal biochemistry matters more. And when your gut microbiome is controlling your epigenetic switches that are, genes that are being expressed or not, neurotransmitter function, which is our brain and mind, right?
Yeah.
Like that's that inextricable link from psychology to physiology. Like if you hit me in the head hard enough, you could change my psychology for the rest of my life, right?
Right.
Or if sitting here, if someone spiked my water with LSD, no matter, thank you, and no matter how hard I try, I'm not going to be the same person for a period of time, right? And it's probably pretty hard to have this conversation. And so that's just that inextricable aspect between psychology and physiology, because if you have abnormal or say aberrant psychology, that is going to change your physiology, and that's going to change who you are, at least at this moment in time.
Right.
And so much of that goes back to gut microbiome more than anything else that's ever been discovered. And what fosters a healthy microbiome is a better diet. So food rules should be constrain it to 11 hours. Do your best, and I mean for real, to eat mostly plants and a wide variety, and have an adventurous mindset like, well, I really could use a wider variety. I've never even heard of a persimmon or parsnip, or I've never tried baby bok choy as a salad, so I'm going to give it a shot. And that's the thing, is the willingness, and being sort of enthusiastically willing to do it, because the more you experiment, guess what? It's obvious. The answer is you'll be surprised at how your tastes change and the different preparation styles. So there's a million recipes for free online, right? That are all plant-based recipes and stuff. So that's kind of rule number 2. It's constrain it, no matter what you're eating, to 11 hours a day, all calories. Second thing is focus on mostly plants, right? And then the third thing is, be mindful of your meat eating, animal protein, because of those things we were just talking about earlier, with mTOR pathways and all of that. Keep it in check. But, that one kind of takes care of itself for the vast majority of people, because if they're eating a lot, they're focused on having, think of it from a dinner plate, right? What should your plate look like? Well, if we went out, we could go within 5 minutes from here, right? We could be down the road at a steakhouse. And if you look around at most people's plates, you'll see, like, out of the plate, you'll see that much as the steak, right? Or a rack of ribs, or whatever the case. Let's just say it's a big, ribeye or whatever. and then you might see next to it a potato, most likely, right? In most places, it's like the most. And I'm not bashing that either. But so what do we got there for plant, for variety, and how much fiber are you getting in this potato, right? How much glucose, blood sugar are you spiking with that potato? A lot, right? So it's like a bag of pretzels, basically. And so, there's some nutritional value there, but not a lot. And if you really watch a lot of people in a lot of restaurants, you know, they're not getting the side salad, right? They're starting with the bloomin' onion or the wings or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
So I think that when people do focus on starting with a salad, well, now you're fairly full. That stuff is bulky, so you don't have room for an entire porterhouse or whatever. You know, so the animal protein intake, if you always put plants first in priority, and when you think of a plate, you know, it's mostly plants, right? And then the rest is this maybe like a fillet size of a serving, or a chicken breast, or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
That's really really simple. I think that when it comes to diet, you know, that takes care of the broad strokes. If you focus on those things, the rest will often take care of itself.
Yeah.
The obvious things, so, you know, it's eat real food, right? Mostly plants, time restricted to 11 hours. That's it, right?
Yeah.
That should be the book, right, on diet.
Right.
And so the way I look at it myself is anything that I'm going to eat, the first thing I ask myself, is it real? I honestly could tell you, like, I can't remember the last time I ate a fake food, like a Pop-Tart or a Twinkie or something like that. I mean, it's been many, many, many years. So it doesn't even, the idea of it doesn't appeal to me.
Right.
And I also know that it's a drug, right? So I know that if I'm eating a Pop-Tart or Fruit Loops or anything, it has a drug effect in my brain that's going to be very highly addictive. And how addictive? Well, we know it's as addictive as cocaine. It's as addictive as nicotine. It's as addictive as alcohol. How addictive are those things?
Yeah.
Right? And so, and people very often think that we're just casually using this word addiction. Well, I mean, if you've been at it a while, you watch people get off sugar and they get irritable, they get headaches, they get the shakes.
Yeah.
You know, those are signs of withdrawal.
Yeah.
Right? So like that in and of itself just it demonstrates the addictive nature of those things. So when I look at that and I size that up, I think, well, how much would I think I would enjoy that? You know, is it worth, like, I'm taking a drug right now. Like, for what? How much upside is there, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much downside is there? And if you just sort of start being mindful again and just being aware, it doesn't take very long at all until people look back at their, you know, gigantic sweet tea, or, you know, their 2 liters of Diet Mountain Dew that they drank every day, or Diet Coke, or whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
And it just looks to them as being this totally foreign and kind of bizarre thing. I think it's an insult, right? Yeah. You're insulting yourself, right? It's an insult to the creator. You can think of those things. I think that helps people get leverage over themselves.
Yeah.
It's just reality, right? It is.
Yeah.
And you've heard me say this before, like, there's this social acceptance, which makes it easier for people to fly under the radar, right? Like, if you saw a woman who was clearly pregnant, right? Like, say she's 8 months, 9 months, walking down the street smoking a cigarette, you're going to make a judgment, you know, I mean, whether you kind of like it or not. I mean, I can't imagine how you wouldn't have a knee-jerk judgment of that person, thinking, unless you've been living in a cave somewhere, right? Like, how could you be, say, a 30-year-old person, you know, carrying a child and smoking Marlboro Reds, right? There's a character judgment that just about anyone in our society would make. Like, this person is unbelievably gross.
Yeah.
Right? Don't you care about
irresponsible?
Yeah,
Right? Yeah,
exactly.
all that.
Or smoking in the car with the windows rolled up. You've ever seen that, right? I still see that to this day. Kids in the back seat, window rolled up and puffing away.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, it's hard to fathom. But yet, if you saw that same lady, you know, the same person, 8 months pregnant, sitting there eating, you know, French fries in some fast food joint, you know, drinking a soft drink, most people don't think anything of that.
Right.
In reality, it's worse than the cigarette, right? And that's it's at least as bad, and nobody could argue any other way,
Right.
Right? We have evidence on this. It's just as addictive, right? And it's just as, or even more harmful.
Yeah.
And so we know that already across the board, and yet it's socially acceptable, so I think it's easy for people to do.
Yeah.
So applying those food rules and really doing it, right? Like in the privacy of your own home. And you don't have to be perfect. That's the best part of this, right?
Yeah.
Like, if your favorite thing in the world is some flavor of Pop-Tart, then by all means indulge, but use it like a drug, which is what it is, right?
Yeah.
So it's like if you and I were sitting here having a glass of wine, you know, we have one glass of wine and go home. Is that detrimental to our health? No. Right?
Yeah.
Is there some advantage even to our health? maybe a little bit, right?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of literature on that.
Yeah.
Whereas, but again, it doesn't take much. If you and I instead we start, we start splitting a bottle, every night or whatever, different story, right? So it's the same thing with the Pop-Tart, except you can't have it as often even as often as something like a glass of wine, right? Because it's way worse, and there's no upside.
The sugar.
So I think that's the key for diet, is just that you apply these simple rules. You time restrict it, and you eat real food, and you eat mostly plants.
Yeah.
And the rest tends to take care of itself. That study that I mentioned of I think it was 257 people with obesity, and they time restricted them, and after a year they were still doing it, and they all lost weight. That was another interesting thing about that, is after the year was up, I can't remember the percentage, it doesn't matter, but a significant percentage of those folks, without any coaching or any cajoling or castigating of any kind, a significant number of those people naturally adopted a much cleaner, healthier diet, the one that we're describing, more real food, which by its very nature means less fake food or processed food.
Yeah.
More plants. They were sort of intuitively, they knew what would constitute even better. And that's another thing about most of us, I think most people, and psychologically, is that we need some kind of momentum, right? Inertia goes a long way. So if you can take somebody and you go, look, I'm not going to change your diet. Keep eating your, Kentucky Fried Chicken every day or whatever you're doing, drinking your soft drinks. But I want you to start constraining it, make it hard, fast. Absolutely don't deviate from this. And I want you to focus on, using this mindset of an adventurous sort of thing, of experimentation. And I'm going to do more fibers, meaning more plants.
Yeah.
Right? And so I don't really like this, but I'll try cooking it this way I found online. If they do that alone, then in most cases, they will drift away. There's just not as much room for the garbage.
Yeah.
And then the garbage starts tasting like garbage, right? Like I'm absolutely I'm as certain as I am of anything that if for some reason that somehow you could persuade me to eat a Big Mac right now or something like that, right? Or even worse, like a Taco Bell or whatever. Yeah. But if you could persuade me to do it, I'm absolutely as certain as I am of anything, it'd make me sick. It'd make me feel sick. I'd have a hard time getting it down. And I would think to myself, how is this popular, right? Like, why does anyone? But it's like cigarettes. Anyone who's ever smoked probably didn't pick up that first cigarette and think, this is delicious, right? Like, I can't, where have you been all my life? I mean, it's usually they're gagging and choking on it, tastes disgusting. You smell like an ashtray and all of these negatives that go with it. Yeah. And yet, before they know it, they can't live without it, right? And it's one of the hardest habits to break. But what's even harder than that is getting off of processed foods. Yeah. It's more addictive than nicotine, and by far. So, people, if you look at even the industry, right, of diet pills that come and go, and diet books that come and go, and not diet, but surgeries, right? Yeah. I mean, people will literally, and I'm not even I'm not sort of, critical of this or being condescending towards people who go this route, but it's just an amazing thing to think about, that you can be a person, perfectly intelligent, a great person, and have discipline in so many other areas of your life, right? And I've seen this, again, it doesn't matter, architects and engineers and everything else in between. It's not a matter of intellect, and it's not a matter of wealth, and really of anything else. It's just, again, this incredibly powerful, hardwired, we're hardwired to eat, and these foods are engineered to prey upon that. Yeah. And you'll see people get to the point where they're literally going to shrink their stomach to the, half the size of this water bottle. So it's now physically impossible for them to do what they can't stop doing, what they otherwise, you got to make it physically impossible. It's like, it's like if I came to you and you're a dentist or orthodontist and say, hey, can you wire my jaw shut for a year? Because I need to lose some weight. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's kind of radical, right?
It is.
It works, of course, but then of course that's a whole other discussion, but for a significant percentage of those people, it doesn't work in the long run. Right. Right. So I mean, it's still, we have to back up. We have to, sort of, really put a lot of effort into unplugging, from a lot of these influences that surround us. Yeah. And I think that taking on that sense of adventure and experimentation, and treating life like a series of short-term experiments, trying to have fun with it.
Right.
Right? Like take it on as a challenge. Like, hey, I wonder if I could eat nothing but plants for the next 2 weeks.
Right.
Right? Do it.
Right.
And then see how you feel. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the thing. And then you just try different variations, which is
Yeah.
what you're doing right now, right? With your own fasting
Yeah. Just playing with
regime.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it's fun. Not always, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting.
It's
you know?
interesting. Exactly.
And you mentioned something earlier. You talked about aberrant thought, and you talk about, like, in this case, food. Can be food, drugs, but even negativity. Like, it can be addictive in a sense that it's
Oh, yeah.
such a hard cycle to break, right? And a lot of it, I think, has to do with the fact that a lot of these things we think that that for your example, that a Pop-Tart is just a Pop-Tart.
Mm-hmm.
A Pop-Tart actually creates a chain reaction physically, and things act and react upon those things that you're taking in.
Yeah.
Same thing. The thought patterns get hijacked by the chemical stuff.
Absolutely.
So we have, whether it's in church we love to call these things, and it is partly driven this way, like a judgmental spirit, or we refer to these things that way, and yeah, I'm not denying that, but I think sometimes we spiritualize things that are kind of natural. They're created ways that our body works, right?
Yeah.
And so, our bodies, as amazingly good as they are at certain things, they're pretty bad at other things. In other words, like, we do get addicted to things. We do and things take away our ability to say no to them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, real generally, I mean, this is just the big picture. Whether it's food, whether it's negativity, whether it's just wrong, a wrong thought pattern that we allow to get ingrained. So just like somebody can be addicted to a processed food or a drug, you can actually get addicted to the reactions that come with thought patterns.
Yep.
How do you really, like, is there a way, and not just some, again, here we're looking for the magic pill, right? How do we
Mhm.
fix all this? But when we talk about thoughts, when we talk about actions, and we talk about emotions being in this cycle, what do you think, where do you believe is the best place to break that cycle, I know I have my opinion of it, but I'm interested in what you
Mhm.
say, that all those things are constantly at work in us,
Mhm.
so our thoughts are being driven sometimes chemically
Mhm.
by addictive whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's patterns, sometimes it's habit. So opening
Yeah.
the refrigerator is a habit.
Mhm.
I wasn't driven there by emotion. Wasn't even driven there by hunger. I was just driven by patterns,
Yeah.
that develop habits. And so, when we look at that, and I look at myself, because here's part of the big deal, and you see this. I can't imagine how much you see it. We have a desire in us. We want to feel well.
Mhm.
We want to be well. None of us want to be sick. None of us want to chronically be in pain. None of us want to be depressed. None of us want to be in these states sometimes that we're in. But a helplessness creeps in because we feel like we're caught in the cycle.
Mhm.
And so, what are some things, big picture, that you can do? I know you talked about, changing the way you eat, maybe shortening your time span. Because
Time,
life change is amazingly hard to conceive.
Yeah.
For me to say I'm going to do something for the rest of my life, I don't want to do anything for the rest of my life.
That's right.
If that makes sense,
Yeah,
right?
it
I
does.
mean, there are big pictures. Yeah, do I want to serve the Lord? Yeah, I want to do that. But as far as an action, there's nothing that much fun that I want to do it all the time for the rest of my life. So,
Yeah.
so looking at it on that scale, so we talked about breaking things into maybe smaller chunks, a couple weeks, try it for a
Yep.
couple weeks, try it for a month, see what emerges. But when it comes to this, our bodies being, our bodies kind of carry out the actions that go on in our mind, right? So
Yeah.
where can we break? What do you think is the best place to kind of break the bad cycles, be it thought, be it
Yeah.
body, or be it food,
All of it.
anything? Yeah.
Yeah. I think in that model, and in your diagrammatic model there, I think for the vast majority of people, and I think with a few exceptions in sort of a life circumstance, I think it has to begin in your mind. Like it has to begin with thoughts. Like you have, in other words, for the vast majority of times, you have to make up your mind, right? Change your mind in many cases, but make up your mind that you're going to take X, Y, and Z actions, right? So technically it starts there. The two are so closely interwoven though. So again, I think in the majority of all cases, you make up your mind, like January 1st, I'm going to join the gym and I'm going to go 5 days a week for 30 minutes each time minimum, right? Set a low bar so you can keep winning, which is important. And then you have a certain time frame or what have you, and then you're trying to use your mindset to then make your actions follow. And if you can do that for long enough, there's a habit is so powerful, right?
Right.
For better or worse. And so to create a new habit and a positive habit, if you can, typically for a month, that if you carry out that thing, and there's biofeedback in success, which is another thing that I think is so simple but yet so powerful, is getting a feedback of each little win along the way, right? So like I always, you probably heard me mention this before about Jerry Seinfeld, but I remember, I don't know where this came up or but I read something, an interview or something with him, and the guy was incredibly successful, obviously, but he was really incredibly prolific, especially at the height of his show. He's writing it, he's starring in it, he's still doing stand-up and all these other things. And he was talking about how his formula for super effectiveness, first of all, he's been meditating for like 40 years, right? So he was, every day, the cast and crew would take their lunch break and he would meditate for 20 minutes and then join in all of that. And so that was interesting, but also his method was just simply a calendar on the wall, right? And it was like one of those 1-year calendars. And every day that he would check the box of whatever goal he had, which, let's say in his case, was to just write one joke a day, right? Whether it was good or bad. Well, let's say for us, it's, I'm going to get in a minimum 30 minutes of exercise every day. Why just 5 days a week,
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking 30 minutes here. Like it shouldn't be, so, and then every day you do it, you put an X through that day. And then his whole thing was just don't break the chain. Right, but psychologically, you do get a real biofeedback because you get momentum and inertia, right? So it's like, look at this. I've got 120 days here. I don't want to. So it could be a day where you're coming down with a cold. You had a really long day. Your flight was canceled. You took this red-eye flight home, whatever. But then you're looking at that thing and you're thinking, man, I'm 120 days into this. Am I going to really break it?
Yeah.
The probability is you could squeak out an extra 30 minutes if all it took was a walk on the treadmill or a walk around the block or do something that would get the TheraBands out and just bring yourself to fatigue. But the likelihood becomes greater and greater that that you're not going to break that. And I think that's an excellent, very simple. And now there's apps for this and everything else, right? So it makes it even easier. But I think that's super important. So I think that in the vast majority of cases, it has to start with your mind, and then your actions follow that. And if you can sustain that, and that's why I think too, instead of saying I'm going to do this for the year as of January, these smaller trials, right? Like small bets. You're making there's variety. There's which brings it's more interest, and it's more interesting in terms of living. So instead, I would say, like, I'm a big fan of 30-day trials.
Yeah.
And for myself, but also because I've found out clinically over many years now that people are pretty good at that, right? Like certainly 21 days, or I'll just say 20 days. Like, here, do this diet for the next 3 weeks and then tell me what happens, right? Wow, my joint pain's gone and I feel all the, well now, what do you think? Could you do it for another 3? Because you probably don't even need to do it longer than that. But as far as intervention goes, but somewhere between 3-4 weeks. But I think 30-day trial mindset is an awesome thing to do, and try to have an adventurous mindset, kind of, it's fun and interesting.
Yeah.
And the probability of success goes higher. I think the only exception that I can think of anyways, as far as when it doesn't begin with your mind, where actions are the first thing, would be a scenario where, somebody finds himself in boot camp, right?
Yeah.
So let's say it was during the years of the draft. So they didn't even think, hey, I want to go join the military. It's like next thing you know, you find yourself there,
Yeah.
and you have no say in the matter. You're up at this time, you're doing this run, you're going to do this. So, but look at what happens, right? How even if in those scenarios the actions come first, it changes the mind.
Right.
People adopt that mindset, right, of the soldier, of the warrior, and all of that.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, unless somebody's in some kind of situation like that, prison sort of, or against their forced, if they're in those actions are forced,
Yeah.
most people, that's not even a factor. So in real life, I think, it all comes down to the mind, and that's why it's very good that you're covering all of these aspects, because they're all connected, right? And so that sort of being mindful of your mind. So but the habits and having an attitude towards it, like with those food rules, right? Time restrict, mostly plants,
Right.
and real food.
Yeah.
That's it, right? So if those are your rules that you're going to strive for all the time, the rest takes care of itself.
Yeah, and I think I'm one of those people that locks into the little nuggets of truth. And one of the things that I've heard you mention is, in relation to all that, is it's what you do most of the time that matters.
Yes.
And that's a great way to put it, because no one wants to fail, but you will. You will give in
Sure.
at that birthday party, or
Yeah.
you'll be in a social situation where I've been doing great for 15 days, but and for me, like I used to say, I'm one biscuit away. That was my little saying to myself, right? Because you eat the first one and it's like, well, I'm a failure, so I'm just gonna I'm gonna fail well, right? So,
Right,
so
yeah.
I'm off the wagon, all that stuff.
All or nothing.
But that's a mindset of, really, that is a mindset where you're still in captivity. You're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for really something that doesn't have the reward for it. So when you talk about these things, when we talk about this, it's like, hey, I want my body detoxed, not because I look good, So what would you rather be? Would you rather be the healthy guy or the hulky guy? Well, some guys will say, oh man, I just would rather be the Hulk, right? But the reality is we all know that's not sustainable.
Right.
We see very few 80-year-old,
Right.
beach body type guys. They
Yeah.
eventually, they may stay healthy,
Yeah.
but they shift to healthy. So yeah,
Right.
it's cool if you want to do that, but at the end of the day, the question is what do we want? What do we want? And in this context, what is God after? Because He wants us to have these things. So God talks about us having peace and joy, and so all these things tend to rob us of those, and that's really where this whole thing comes in. Is how can we return to you say so literally the body does have a homeostasis, but there's a spiritual homeostasis too. Like there's a place God wants us, and some of the time our body can take us out of that. Our body can take us out. Our mind can take us out.
Yep.
And the beauty of our body is also can be a detriment, because it's the complexity of it leaves us frustrated sometimes in our ability to control ourselves, which I mean, that's the epic battle of the spirit and the flesh, right?
Yeah.
When you talk about that in the Bible, how they are going to run sometimes contradictory to one another, but if we can get a harmony, so to speak, of these things, again, you're never going to get 100% success, but are you closer to where you wanted to be?
Right.
So that's the that's the big deal. So
Yeah.
so if you were to say, I was going to say if you could say, but I'm going to give you can say, right? I want you to say to an average person, maybe they've never thought about any of this. Maybe this is all new. Maybe they're mind blown, whatever. What are 3, 4, 5, whatever things that you would say, what are pick the top three things that someone could do, that you can say with the utmost confidence, if they do these three things for the next 3 weeks, it would cause them to see that change is possible, that they can do it, and that if they do, they see a reward.
Okay. Yeah. So first, and I'm not doing it to sort of take the easiest answer here, but I would start with just those few things as far as, pick your time, your eating window, right? That's so fundamental. Also, we talked a little bit about the importance of sleep and focus on that and really prioritize that, because that could, that'd be, we'd need probably to do a whole other evening to cover all the aspects of sleep and circadian rhythm and all of that. But just suffice to say for now, I mean, it is the most fundamental thing, right? I mean, it's like you cannot live without it. It's absolutely crucial, and it's not to be taken lightly.
Yeah.
So I would say that's the second thing. The easiest thing it should be is to time restrict your eating. I mean, that's the thing, and like we were talking about before, I just cannot. I don't know where to begin or how to have a conversation with a grown adult who, and for no physiological reason. It's not like they physically can't, constrain themselves to 11 hours a day. It's that, there's not enough effort being put into it. And usually if you dig deep enough in that, they'll find that, I didn't realize it was that important. No matter what I say, it's like sort of that, it's hard to really get through, to the level of the gravity of the situation with that kind of thing. Yeah. So I would say absolutely do that and really take it seriously and work at that. And then the sleep thing would be the number two, or maybe even should be number one, but certainly up there. Make it a priority, and a few quick things about sleep tidbits or sort of sleep hygiene, just really quick and simple. In the evening after the sun goes down, have your house dimly lit. If you wanted to step it up a bit, you can get those bulbs that have no blue spectrum. They're, so they're kind of an amber hue or whatever.
Yeah, not these.
Yeah, not these.
Yeah, this is bad.
Yeah. We're getting, our circadian rhythm is being trampled on, but that's okay. It's not that late. But if you put on those, you could buy those cheap glasses. Some of them, the better ones, are a little more expensive, but they block out that. So if we had those on, we'd be getting no stimulation to our, master clock called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And that activates every cell in the body to get ready to go, right? So the reason I mention that is simple things that people do that maybe they're not aware of is they get in bed at night and then they flip on the TV and it's fairly close to where they're sleeping and it's bright, right? Well, you could buy a $10 pair of amber glasses off Amazon, put those on and watch your TV in bed and have an entirely different outcome just from something simple like that. Yeah. Or better yet, watch TV elsewhere and not where you sleep. The other thing is people look at their phone, right before they go to bed, and they don't have a filter on, or they're not wearing the shades. And so they just get this big activation of the brain. And even though they'll say, well, I seem to sleep just fine, you're not. I can tell you, if we hooked you up and did a sleep study on you, you're going to see aberrancy in that sleep structure as a consequence of that action. So a couple simple things. There are others, but I would say take it seriously and take your sleep hygiene very seriously. And that just means that if you have a problem, then figure it out. If you can't figure it out, like by just doing your own reading, then go see somebody, whether it's me or others or whoever. But see somebody who sort of, uses maybe a clinical nutritional approach. Try that phenobute that I mentioned if you don't have any other medications that would contraindicate that. Try to be as consistent as you can on your sleep-wake time. Yeah. So you're not in constant social jet lag, which is that deviation from work night to weekend and that sort of thing. So I would say that those are the two most important things. And 3 weeks for that, for a lot of people, is long enough, but sometimes it's not, because like in 3 weeks they're just getting better at it, right? Like they're just getting good. But I would say too that just generally speaking, and I don't know, probably at least 90% of the population, I would say, try to eat nothing but plants for 3 weeks. Yeah. Fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, right? And And any kind of fat you want, well, I should say, if you wanted to stick with a plant, a total plant diet, like olive oil, coconut oil, you could stick with those. I don't really care too much when people do this if they use some butter or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's not going to have much of an impact in terms of the way things will change.
Yeah.
But as an experiment, because most people have never done that, right? Like, I mean, do you know many people that have ever?
Well, I mean, being honest, one of the toughest diets I ever did, was that.
Yeah.
It was horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, I mean, it wasn't, and I mean, it wasn't enjoyable. I was struggling, but, and that's the funny thing is, we're all pain averse, right? We don't want that.
Right.
But it kind of drove me to say, and I thought at the time, I mean, I had lost some weight. I was feeling pretty good. But I just cut all that stuff out. And for me, I mean, it wasn't that I wasn't eating steak every night. It was more the, some of the carbohydrates and stuff that you don't get, the flour, the corn, particularly the corn chips.
Exactly.
For me, that's my thing.
Yeah.
Right. So you cut that stuff out. And, but so you do, but it makes you realize that I should be able to do that.
Right. And then you feel different by 3 weeks, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, people do the whole
great.
30 and all that. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, I did this, sort of there's some degree of pain or suffering to some degree.
Yeah.
And then you also get that great feeling of making it.
Yeah.
Right? It's like finishing a marathon or something that's not easy to do.
Yeah.
And so you do this for 21 days or 30 days or however much, but even 21 days, to your question, that's enough for the majority of people to feel a real difference.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, you get that positive feeling from succeeding. And you set the bar reasonably low, 3 weeks. I mean, I could fast for 3 weeks if I had to, right? I mean, it's like that would not be fun.
Right.
But it's doable. I could do it. It's not going to kill me.
Yeah.
So if I just said I'm going to eat only, since I'm going to do this, I might as well get creative. So I'm going to make these different vegetable soups, right? I'm going to make like this, plant-based, sort of vegan, whatever stew. Smoothies, right? And so, it forces you to try different things. You might be surprised at some of the things you find out that you really like.
Yeah.
It's funny, I was out for dinner with a friend not long ago at a Lebanese restaurant downtown Raleigh called City, and he had never had tabbouleh before, right? And it's, they make a really good one if you like that. But he was blown away by this, right? Like that, this is so, like, where have you been all my life, kind of this thing. And that's the thing, is that I had to browbeat him to even try it, right?
Yeah.
And then it's just this big surprise. They have this other dish called muhamra, and it's delicious if you're ever there, downtown Raleigh. And it's like a puree of roasted red peppers, maybe pistachio. There's a little pomegranate in there. It's just, it's delicious. I don't care if you
just different than what we eat.
Exactly. And so same dinner, same person, just couldn't get over how good this was.
Yeah.
And boy, I got to start, branching out a little bit. So that's a big thing where taking on, say, a 21-day challenge dietarily, I think, because most people, right, like most Americans, do eat a lot more animal protein than would be probably ideal, right? And at the same time, so we've got this, we're a little or a lot excessive there, depending on the science that you look at, and then on the other side, we're plant deficient, right? And so if you focus on ramping that up, this kind of teeter-totter effect, there's not enough room to keep this up in terms of animal protein, so you just get a better balance. So that is very often an awesome icebreaker. And if a person gets through 3 weeks and they say, boy, I felt great, I'm still not a fan of that diet, but man, I got to say. Yeah. And then I would just say to that person, all right, 90 days from now, do that again.
Yeah.
Right? Put it on your calendar. And then 90 days later, do that again.
Yeah.
Right? And after a while, you know how it is. And it's just now, like before we started this conversation, we were just talking about your fasting experience. And you were saying that, now you look forward to it.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's like, boy, I can't wait. I'm going to be fasting tomorrow.
Yeah.
People think that sounds crazy,
right.
but it's like you said, it becomes interesting, if nothing else. You're seeing how it's affecting you physically different every time you do it.
Yeah.
You know, it's different. It's a progression. You know that what you're doing is, it takes some effort in the short term, but you're reaping these huge long-term benefits.
Yeah.
So the other thing is, very simply, I would say that most people, if they have not been supplementing with omega-3 fatty acids, you know, EPA, DHA, do that. If they're essential fatty acids, we need them, right? Most people aren't going to eat sardines and, you know, and other mackerel, herring, those kinds of, where they're rich sources of those long chain omega-3s. You can't get enough by flax and flaxseed oil and that sort of thing. So add that in. If a person's never taken a probiotic, get a good quality one, you know, just any professional grade is good. And also mix them up. Like, I don't take the same one all the time, and I don't take it every day. You know, I take it just a few times a week, and that's probably good enough for just about anybody.
Yeah.
But certainly add that in. Do a 3-week trial where you're nothing but plants, and you're cranking fatty acids, and you're doing some probiotics, and yeah, see what happens at the end of 21 days. Or if you're even up for it, do 30 days.
Yeah.
But you'll on a lot of levels, you're going to learn about yourself, like you have been, because you've been mindful, meaning aware of your own physical functions and how your physiology changes when you're putting on one of the greatest stressors that you can, and that's a positive stress, as long as it's short term, right? If you fast for too long, bye-bye, right? Like, it's all a matter of balance. You can exercise yourself to death, right? And so a little bit's great. So it's all about the sort of the dosage, but you know, that's another you know, benefit to doing that, is doing these short-term trials. You are facilitating, you know, the body's detoxification process just by time restricting alone, just by doing more real foods, fresh foods, plants. You know, we need that stuff to be able to rid ourselves of all of the other, you know, the other accumulation of all of these, you know, the toxicity psychologically, physiologically, and all that. And what a powerful thing. I mean, you're getting that positive feedback of success because you're using your own mind. It's mindset, it's grit, right? So it's the mind over matter aspect. So it's like, you know what? This is going to be tough. I'm going to hate this diet, let's say plant-based, or just nothing but plants for the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm going to hate it, but you know what? I'm doing it anyway. I want to see what this feels like. Just that, right? Like I'm strong enough to do it, right? Even if it's totally misery. I could tough it out for 21 days.
Absolutely.
And then you have that win, and then you have the observation. Hey, you know, I haven't had heartburn in the last 2 weeks. Like, that's the kind of stuff you hear all the time, right?
Yeah.
Or, boy, I've been sleeping a lot better.
Yeah.
You know, well, that's, you know, that's another interesting observation. Probably you shouldn't be having that ice cream at 10 o'clock at night before you go to bed, right? That kind of stuff. So that's in reality, that's how to do it. I think that's a great practice. It's easy to break it down for folks, and you know, that the proof is in the pudding as always. And you know, after thousands and thousands of people that I've interacted with and been able to sort of guide through these processes and learn from over 2 decades, I mean, it's I think that's ultimately, you know, from at least so far, what I've learned so far, I mean, that seems to be the best way to go about it. And I think like this kind of format that you've got going, long form discussions, revisiting in different ways, that's what it takes too.
Yeah.
Like, people aren't going to have one conversation or read one book or even a stack of them. You know, I think that that this kind of format is the only way, and you and I have talked about that over the years, right? That like, even, you know, what does it take, you know, when your goal is pure, right? Like, your goal is totally, I mean, the only selfishness that could be found construed in my own goals is the good feeling I have helping other people. So there's always that, there's always something in it for us, right? But otherwise, you know, it's not a profit motive. It's not a confirmation bias because I always want to be right or be, you know, anything like that. It's always just, you know, the interest in learning. You know, if you're not growing, you're dying, right? It's one, you can't stay, you know, stagnant in a psycho-emotional kind of way. So this kind of format, I think, is really, really awesome, because that's what it takes. Because you know how it is, like, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? And so something, you know, if you throw enough darts at the board, you're going to hit the bullseye, right? And everybody's got a different bullseye. That's the thing. And so once it kind of, they see the big picture, and then it's not so overwhelming, they can break it down into these actionable steps. I mean, that's a really, I think that's an awesome thing. I think that's what it takes. I mean,
Yeah.
other colleagues of mine, you know, people that I graduated with, have been in practice as long as I have, that and you know, they'll sometimes make comments like that, like I don't know how you do that, like how do you have that kind of, you know, that practice. And that's the thing, is none of them, not one, not a single person that I graduated with, 86 students, we're all pretty close, we've been through the ringer together for years, not one of them does this, like not one. They don't do any kind of public presentations, you know, they don't do in-house, you know, in-clinic presentations. They just sort of, you know, ignore it. It's too difficult. It's too time-consuming. You know, there's no profit in it, right? And there isn't, right? I mean, from a selfish standpoint, right? But that's why I really think not everything should be for profit. You know, so, but that's, I think that's sorely lacking as far as the willingness of a lot of people in a clinical sense that have the understanding, that do it themselves. You know, and they'll do it for their own and with their own families, but they don't have the inclination. Again, it's the public speaking thing too, right? As so many people are afraid of it, but they don't have the inclination to, you know, to get out there and do the best you can to like get the message out there, and they're going to do it with it whatever they will, right? But yeah, I think that's hugely important. And you know, if everybody did all these things that we're talking about, I mean, people like me would have to look for something else to do. I mean, that's the reality, right? Is that like the majority of the people, the severe, significant majority of people that end up in my office, you know, sitting across from me, and we're talking about this stuff. I mean, it's got to be at least 2 out of 3, at least 2 out of 3. I'm being really conservative, but they're there because of chronic stress. Yeah. And I really feel it's more like 3 out of 4. I feel like it's probably more like 75%. Whether it's headaches or back pain or neck pain or a frozen shoulder or whatever. It might not be readily obvious, but a lot of these metabolic issues, I mean, that's why it does start the trickle down, exactly everything you've been covering here. And so that's why I take a very long time on that first visit, you know, and I have this very long intake form, and I ask a million questions, because you know, trying to understand just to your very first point, where do we break in? How do we, you know, get in there? How do we break people out of this vicious cycle? You know, and that's the trick of it, is that it's not going to be one thing, right? It's going to be a few things that are manageable, that you can chunk down into sort of bite-sized, you know, action steps that taken together are quite powerful. You know, from afar, it looks like nothing. And so very often people won't do it because it doesn't seem complicated enough. That's another big problem, right? It's like, well, if it can't be that easy, you know what I mean? Like if it was that easy, everyone would do it. You know, that kind of mindset. And the real beauty of the whole situation is that it is indeed, you know, that easy. But you know, of course, it's easier said than done, right? Like just getting off of sugar, you know, just learning how, or putting in an effort to diversifying your plant intake. Nuts and seeds and fruits and vegetables. You know, it's, again, how easy does that sound? But you know, anyone who's been around for a while knows that most people really struggle with that. You know? So, did that answer your question? As far as like those, I think those are the steps. If I was going to say, if you're doing a few things, if you did those few things, that would absolutely have an impact. And unless you are extraordinarily healthy and stress-free, you know, then if you do those things, and that of course is a tiny percentage of people around us, right, are extraordinarily healthy, stress-free, like well-rested with a diverse diet. So I think if people start with that, and it's easy to wrap their mind around. And of course, you know, the movement, we won't call it exercise, right? Just vigorous movement. You know, make it 15 minutes a day. I mean, literally. And that's really all it takes. If I don't have any time, but I still want to check that box, I'll go in, and if I go to a gym or whatever, like I'll do the interval training. So say on a bike or an upper body ergometer, 4 minutes at low intensity, 30 seconds on high. Do that 4 times. I'm out of there in 18 minutes. And I did a lot. And if you were running at a steady state or biking at a steady state, it would take you an hour and a half to accomplish what I just did in 18 minutes. And then if I want to do resistance stuff that day, and I'm not really going to go for it, and I don't even feel like being there, then I'm still out the door in 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
I'm just going to bring everything to fatigue once and walk out the door.
Right.
Check the box.
Yeah.
Right? Set the bar low.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like that. And, you know, the final thing, too, back to your point about, I wanted to just sort of add that to that point you made about being on or off a wagon, you know, like that sort of like, or failing, right? People have the mindset of like, I'm on this diet and, you know, I just kind of failed. And so I might as well just keep failing, right?
Yeah.
Or just really, if I'm going to fail, let's make it really great.
Yeah.
That I do not find that that's useful or constructive to almost anybody. I find that, you know, just accepting that nothing that we're talking about has to be done perfectly, you know, especially diet. And like back to what you mentioned earlier, it's what you do most of the time that matters. Stay focused on that.
Yeah.
Just plan on, out of the next 365 days a year, I don't know, maybe 65 times I'm going to deviate, you know, from this course.
Yeah.
But if you look back at 300 days of excellence, 65 days of, you know, and maybe out of those 20 days of total debauchery, right? Like you're on a cruise or something.
Yeah.
You know, that's fine.
Yeah.
Right? There is no reason to set the bar anywhere else. You don't, this idea of perfection is an illusion anyway.
Yeah.
And there is a very good argument to be made for an imperfect diet, right? And for an imperfect lifestyle. You know, that concept, I know you've heard me speak about hormesis, which is, you know, it's kind of that which does not kill you makes you stronger, right? So a little bit of toxicity is a really good thing.
Yeah.
Like and it sounds strange, right? You heard me give examples of that study with the radiation exposure. A crew had a lower incidence of cancer after nuclear radiation.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was in the 80s. But there's an argument to be made for mild toxicity, you know, to elicit robust reparative mechanisms within your physiological system. So there's an argument to be made for the occasional fill in the blank, Krispy Kreme, or Pop-Tart, whatever it is, right?
Yep.
Like, and that's the thing. I kind of beat up on those foods. I mean, I do, not kind of. And I do it because of these other reasons that people just do it on autopilot because they're addicted to these things. They don't realize the gravity of the situation. But if you just accept right off the bat that periodical exposure is possibly even good for you.
Yeah.
Like you're better off if you have the occasional sort of, you know, highly processed food, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
You're better off if you do that occasionally than I am if I never do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you know, from that rationale, if you had a cigar, you know, a couple times a year because you love cigars,
Yeah.
you know, you're probably, there's a serious argument to be made that you're better off having done that than never have done it at all.
Yeah.
Right? So it's always that sort of, and that's where it goes back to your original point about the mind being, the primacy of the mind, right?
Yeah.
Is that if you have your mindset right, and this fits into your construct of how you want to design your life and how you want to, you know, continue to carry those action steps out, it's guilt-free, it's less addictive, it may be anti-addictive, right? Because it's taken on as a challenge. It's me versus this cigar or whatever it is, right? So it's like, I know I'm sort of dancing around here with an addictive substance, but I get a lot of joy out of it, and it's definitely not going to get the better of me. You know, you have that sort of, that mindset. And again, you could fill in the blank with pizza from Domino's, or, you know, versus one that you made at home or went to an actual, like, family-owned Italian restaurant. You know, I would say
More real food.
yes, real pizza, right?
Yeah.
You know, and all of those things, you know, apply on down the line. There's the chicken that you make at home, and then there's the Kentucky Fried Chicken that's loaded with trans fats, right? So, but yeah, I don't think there's any reason to strive for this perfection. I think it's an illusion. It's unnecessary. There's even an argument against it. So I think that there's no hook to put yourself on, you know, so there's no hook to keep yourself on. It's just sort of like, hey, if you are living your life, in other words, especially when it comes to dietary aspects and these simple daily constructs like time-restricted eating and all that stuff, right? A consistent circadian rhythm, nurturing your sleep. If you've been living your life like the majority of people around us in our culture, then you're not doing those things. I mean, right? It's the majority of people don't do them. And so instead of, you know, again, this imaginary hook that people get on, right? Feel bad and they beat themselves up. Oh, I'm just lazy. I'm this, I'm that, and whatever the other thing. You gotta first accept, and I know this is exactly what you've been driving, is through the neuroplasticity thing. Hey, like, you can change it.
Yeah.
right? It can work for you or against you.
Mhm.
You know, if I got in an accident on my way home tonight and I lost my right arm, am I never going to be able to write again because I'm right-handed, or can I learn to write with my left hand?
Yeah.
It's that's a Herculean feat that
Yeah.
the brain is going to now perform.
Mhm.
You know, there's really crazy kind of wild studies. You can put these goggles on people that invert the entire room,
Mhm.
right? And so they'll put those on a bunch of people, and they're walking around, stepping over where they see the chandeliers. You know, they're sort of, you know, within days, the brain just automatically navigates it, and in their mind's eye, flips it back around. They can function no problem.
Yeah.
Within days, like just a few days.
Yeah.
And then you take them off. Now they're goggle free, and they need another few days to adapt back the other way.
Yeah.
That's awesome, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so once people understand these things and they just sort of pick a few, like these 3 or 4 things
Yeah.
that they're just going to plug in and focus on for 30 days,
Yeah.
it's easy. And once they get there, they get the win, and then they notice the things in their physiology, and then they realize, well, it's actually not that hard, right? And so
Yeah.
you can kind of evolve from there.
Yeah.
But that's so important.
Yeah.
And it takes so long to get that, to have lots of these conversations and get that to soak in to the consciousness, I think, you know, of any crowd, any size of a crowd,
Yeah.
that's why it's not done,
Right.
right? Like, we have super highly trained, brilliant physicians all around us, like among the most educated people in the most complex field, but they got 15 minutes with you, let's say,
Yeah.
right? Or go crazy, they got 30 minutes, right?
Mhm.
That's rare.
Yeah.
Like, a doctor sees 16 people a day.
Right.
How are they going to get any of these things across?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just, that's where it's not feasible, which is why
Yeah.
it's so important to do this.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I mean, one of the things when you talk about that is just doing the things better, you know, because it's easy for me. I'm kind of an extreme person.
Yeah.
And so, you know, jokingly, it's like, okay, well, let's do an all plant diet. Okay, that's good. Oh, but wait, you probably need to do organic, because that's better, right?
Yeah.
So it's not good enough to do plant. Now I have to do organic. Oh, well, but hold on. You know, raw is better than cooked, or cooked is better than raw, or,
Yeah.
you know, and so you get into all these things, and sometimes it's easy to just throw your hands up and go, I can't ever do it right, so I'm not going to do it at all.
Exactly.
The reality is it's not right, wrong is better,
Exactly.
you know.
It's
So
all
yeah,
degrees.
yeah. So an apple is better than a Snickers, or,
Right.
you know, and so just do better.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know, when what they say, when you know better, do better. And so
Exactly.
what you're doing is just giving out this, you know, the amazing ability that you have to take these tremendously just mind-boggling processes in our bodies and just sort of boil it down to, you know, eat mostly plants. Eat mostly plants,
Yeah.
you know, can be a 4-hour discussion for you as to why. You
Sure,
know?
yeah.
And it's amazing that when we take that kind of information and just make it, you know, for the average person, okay, you know, I mean, you talked about that. I think I heard you say at one time a statistic. There was some statistic about the person that eats one salad a day.
Mm-hmm.
Not this big of a salad, just a salad,
Yeah.
right? You know, their incidence of disease,
Heart disease.
into their
Yeah.
later years,
Yeah,
you know,
dementia.
is tremendously reduced, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, so part of it is realizing that we steward our body,
Mm-hmm.
even though it feels like sometimes it drives us. The reality is we're the keepers of it.
Yep.
And I think that you know, one of the things that I've always admired about you is how you so freely help other people do that. That's huge, you know, and just the impact you've had. People even in our church, but definitely in our community, and even outside our community is just, it's amazing to see, you know, how you use your talents
Thank you.
to influence and affect the lives of other people. It's, you know, it's
Thanks.
humbling, you know, it's an honor to know you, you know,
Well, thank you
and
very much. Likewise.
and to be able to just be, you know, really just associated with you is, it's exciting, you know.
Oh, well,
you know.
thank you very much. Yeah.
So
I love this.
I appreciate you taking the time to do it. and
My
be-
pleasure. We
be
can
with
do it
us,
again.
You know, today. Yeah, absolutely.